Welcome to Truth Talk. Today's Truth Talk will be presented by Ken Sawa, Executive Director of Catholic Charities in the Inland Empire in Southern California. For our audience here in the studio, and for those out there viewing us through Facebook and YouTube streaming, we ask you to post your questions, to prepare your questions for Mr. Ken. And now we welcome Ken Sawa.
Good evening. Special thanks to WordNet for their invitation for me to speak tonight. I'm quite excited and blessed by the opportunity. I've been asked to share with you a personal conviction that has been a driving force and an all-consuming mission throughout my life. My words are a reflection on my journey with God to find my own path, to love thy neighbor, with the support of the church in rising to this call. I've been praying for us over the last few days that each of us this evening will receive whatever God has to offer us during this time, as we each move forward with renewed determination to be Christ in the world. Through God's grace, time and time again, I have been nudged and led by God to not just be a person of faith, but to be a person rooted in faith in action of my loving neighbor through service. My journey towards living a life of faith, rooted in action, began as I approached my 30th birthday. My education had been completed. I had a good job, a great place to live, a nice car, was in good physical shape, and enjoyed an extended group of friends. Life was good. I was on an early morning run before work one day. Running was a good prayer time for me. I remember feeling overwhelmed with gratitude for the many blessings of my life. Then unexpectedly, the thought popped into my head, is this it? This is wonderful. Is this just the beginning of the rest of my life? Is my whole life to be about comfort, obtaining what I want, and settling in with what makes me satisfied and happy? In reflection, that single thought is what I now know to be the first nudge of grace. A nudge of grace from God that began my journey. Within months after that, I became aware of a volunteer program for lay men and women that was sponsored by a religious community of priests and brothers. The intent of the program was not vocations, but an opportunity for lay people to fully live the gospel by strengthening one's spiritual life and living a life of service for others. About 10 of us from around the country were selected to live together in a Christian community in a large old house not far from downtown Los Angeles. We were each provided with an old car, $50 a month, and the opportunity to commit ourselves full-time to Christian service for 1 year. Just hearing of that program was another nudge that did not go unnoticed by me. Opting to leave my job, my home, everything dear to me was an uncertain act of faith. I spent the bulk of that year working directly with the homeless on Skid Row and Venice Beach. Prior to that, my life of faith had been centered on enthusiastically studying Scripture, understanding the teachings of the church, developing spiritual disciplines that worked for me, and deepening my relationship with God the Father, Jesus his Son, and the Holy Spirit. But in that year, Jesus' instruction in Matthew 22 came absolutely alive for me. You must love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. The second resembles it. You must love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang the whole law and the prophets too. I remember when I was a teenager preparing for confirmation, a religious education teacher made this point by using the cross as an example. She taught us that the vertical bar of a cross represents our personal connection and relationship with God, while the horizontal bar represents our communal connection and relationship with others. Also in that year in LA, I met a social worker for the very first time. In my mind, already with a bachelor's degree and a master's degree under my belt, I was done with school. But when I watched her work at the homeless center and listened to her passion for justice and service, it was as if God were laying down the stepping stones for my own future. I felt as if God was stitching together the perfect integration of my faith and a profession. Literally, an abundantly clear way of life rooted in faith and action. This was not a nudge, but a discernible push. At that time, schools of social work were few in Southern California, essentially in Los Angeles and San Diego, with nothing in between. I excitedly began to investigate the process of applications to UCLA and Cal State Long Beach. Then I received a phone call from my dad. My grandmother was diagnosed with stomach cancer. He told me he needed me to come live with him and to care for my grandmother in her final months, as soon as my commitment to the program ended in a few weeks. I was devastated by the news. There was no decision to be made. My family needed me. My newly found mission to not just be holy, but to act holy would change. And it would be fulfilled now in the loving care of my grandmother. I also felt the disappointment that in reality, I would likely not make it back to LA for a new career in social work. I had a vague confidence that God would provide a new path for me to follow in the future. A number of weeks after I arrived at my dad's place, my grandmother passed away at his house with both of us at her side as she took her final breath. It was a profoundly spiritual and sacred moment that I will always cherish. Yet following her funeral, I felt lost and was filled with doubt. I didn't have a job. I did not have a house. I did not even have a car. I was a complete stranger in the community where my dad lived, but he still needed me to be around for a while. Spiritually, this was a very quiet and lonely time. It seemed like God and I were waiting for one or the other to eventually speak. About a month after the funeral, I received an unexpected call from one of my housemates from the community in LA. She was from India, and she told me she was going back home to India for 6 months and invited me to come for a visit and meet her family. My first thought was, India? I never imagined traveling there by myself. My immediate second thought, though, was Mother Teresa. Could it be possible for me to show up in Calcutta and meet her? I spoke with my father about the possibility and decided to go. I knew in my heart this would be a spiritual journey for me, to travel through such a large country, rich in ancient religious culture, visit my friend, and plan a final stop in Calcutta to meet Mother Teresa. My personal pilgrimage lasted 6 weeks and was packed with adventure, new food, new sights, knew everything about the trip. So much more than I ever imagined, except Mother Teresa. When I and other international guests arrived at her convent one morning, hoping to see her, we were told that she was out of the country and in the United States. Really? I was so terribly disappointed. So close, but yet so far. But I was able to attend 5 a.m. Mass at the convent the next day. In a small empty room on a barren floor with the Daughters of Charity and other guests. I remember as I was walking away after Mass through the crowded alleys of Calcutta, I remember how strongly that I felt, indeed, I had met her. Her spirit was everywhere. I had been blessed by her. Just a few weeks after I returned back to California, an old friend contacted me to tell me that she heard Mother Teresa was going to be in Tijuana. Did I want to risk the 3-hour drive down there to see if that was even remotely true? Of course. She heard Mother Teresa was supposed to be there on a Saturday for the blessing of a building for the Brothers of Charity, if I remember right. I was just blown away and excited by this second chance. After a few unintentional bum steers by the locals, miraculously, seriously, we found the large flat dirt lot just outside the hustle and bustle of the city, where it looked like a portable building had been erected. There were only a few parked cars and what seemed like not nearly enough chairs for an event. Heavy dust was in the air. As my friend and I approached the building, we saw maybe 3 others talking to a sister wearing Mother Teresa's unmistakable garb. She spoke broken English to the visitors, and we heard her say, "I will see if Mother Teresa has time to greet you," and pointed away from the building and said, "Wait over there." Oh my gosh, I thought, oh my Lord, I prayed, please, please let her come. And then out she came. So small in stature, so slow in walking toward us. I just took it all in. The 5 of us gathered around her in a semicircle. The nun with her explained why they were in Tijuana. Mother Teresa said a few words, and I honestly do not remember exactly what she said. Her presence and her spirit consumed me and were more powerful than any words she may have spoken. As my friend and I drove away down that dusty, bumpy dirt road toward the border, I was re-blessed by Mother Teresa, and I was determined to find a way to emulate her Christ-like love for others. One way or another, it was going to happen. Months before, shortly after I arrived at my dad's house, after I left LA, I started to go to morning mass at a local parish. There was a nun there that asked if I could help care for a priest that recently had a stroke. She asked me if I could take care of him for morning strolls through the neighborhood in his wheelchair. He could not speak, but he sure looked forward to those walks after daily mass. And I took him faithfully for weeks, practicing loving my neighbor. Then one day, Sister told me about a book club at the University Newman Center. Knowing how lonely I was, she suggested I might meet some people and gave me a phone number. Of course, I was nervous showing up at a meeting of a small, close-knit group of people that I did not know at all. In a very short period of time, I went from a life full of like-minded, like-hearted people that were committed to the essence of the gospel, from that to utter isolation. I needed to reach out despite my discomfort. Within minutes of arriving, during the pre-meeting chit-chat, I just happened to overhear someone say to a few others in the room, "Did you hear that there's a new social work program starting at Cal State in the fall?" What? Did I hear that right? It is so close that I could almost throw a rock from where I stood and hit that university. I was shocked, but I said nothing, but wondered all the way home. Is this a God thing? This is a God thing. I called the university the next day. There was still time to submit my application. Fast forward to today. This summer, I will have worked at Catholic Charities as a social worker for 29 years. Without any doubt, God pointed me to the right place that exemplifies the social mission of the church, to love thy neighbor. A place where we believe we are our brother's keeper, and through our actions, we are the heart and hands of Jesus. The foundation of Catholic Charities is built on Catholic values and Catholic social teaching. We stand firmly in our acknowledgement of the dignity and worth of all people, regardless of their circumstances and without judgment, and for the right of all to access what is needed in life. Our action statement reads, Catholic Charities provides compassionate social services that respond to the suffering of the vulnerable and those in crisis. The vulnerable and those in crisis. Those that come to Catholic Charities for help are in some sort of crisis. All of us are faced with crisis in our lives at one point or another. But Catholic Charities is there for families and our brothers and sisters that have nowhere else to turn for the help and the hope they desperately need from others. Catholic Charities reaches out to those who most often are ignored and unfairly judged by others. We simply share what we have with those that need us most. My journey toward faith in action led me to this life. It's important to point out the role of the support of our church that had been available to me as I strove to rise to the call of incorporating a radical love of neighbor throughout my life and continuing today. Though often overlooked, it's phenomenal how often Catholics are reminded and challenged to put our faith in action. Scripture, Catholic thought and tradition, Catholic social teachings, and the leaders of faith among us today are tremendous resources to us as we seek to love God and love neighbor. To this day, I desperately rely on this wisdom and inspiration as I continue on the path to love and serve God and others. Pope Francis's words have encouraged and uplifted me so many times over the years. One of my favorite quotes of his is, "How marvelous it would be if, At the end of the day, each of us could say, today, I have performed an act of charity toward others. For that is a core purpose of Catholic Christians, to actively seek ways to show charity towards others in our lives, those known or unknown. So I'd like to end with some encouragements for you. You've very patiently listened to my story, but we all have our own stories. Perhaps you are in the beginning, or the middle, or toward the end of your journey. If you're seeking direction on how you might be called to live faith in action in your love for others, remember, ask and you shall receive. It all begins with our continuous awareness of God's presence in our lives. We must pray constantly to be in God's Spirit, and then watch for the nudges and the pushes from God for you to love thy neighbor, perhaps in ways you never imagined. See the spiritual dots in your life and connect them. God is simply loving you and showing you the way. Pay attention to what you see right in front of you and wonder how you can better engage and more courageously step up to be Christ's love in the world. Acting on God's behalf, seek out opportunities to put your faith in action. Reach out in love. Do your part, and God will do the rest. So I encourage you, put your faith in action and then observe. Just wait for it and see how abundantly God supports and participates in your efforts. Expect that. I will now close with a verse from Jeremiah. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Okay, thank you so much, Ken. Wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Wonderful truth talk. We have 3 questions from our YouTube audience. The first question says, did you ever have a real doubt or real doubts that you were truly following God's urge?
I'm not so sure that I had doubts. I think it was more as if I had the will. I think hearing God's call was not the problem. Paying attention to what that call was and opting to listen and act was more the challenge from time to time.
Okay. Then the second question reads, what is the most important thing you've learned after many years of serving the last, the lost, and the least?
I think my answer to that is that we are all made in the image and likeness of God, and the last and the least get lost in that. My wife and I, as volunteers, provide coffee and nice big fat Costco muffins and bananas and snacks, hot chocolate. Just like coffee and donuts after Mass. At 6:30 in the morning, for 7 years, every single Sunday for 7 years, we're on a street here in the city with our little setup, providing hospitality to those who have nowhere to sit, to those who are shooed away by society, to those who are lonely, brokenhearted, and to be present to them in the sharing of coffee and a muffin has shaped my view of our call as Christian people in recognizing God's presence and the dignity of everyone, whether we understand them or not.
Okay. Thank you for that. And the third question, what is the greatest need the people you serve have today?
That's a super big question because there's a lot of very specific services that families need today, particularly as we're heading out of a global pandemic. But I'm going to say what they all need is care. Care, someone to listen, somebody, human contact. Lots of compassion and an open-heartedness of someone who cares. Instead of this sense of isolation or aloneness or exception or people misjudging them or asking them to do things that are too difficult for them. But I just think it's viewing them as truly as our brothers and sisters, and them taking that in and feeling that and knowing that to be true. I think that's what people need who come to us.
Okay, thank you. Now, those are our 3 live streaming from our YouTube channel questions. Now, I will direct my attention towards our live audience here in the studio and see if any of you have any questions for Ken.
Who do you consider to be our neighbors? Who do you consider to be our neighbors?
Yeah, great question. Actually, the story I talked about, the homeless outreach, coincidentally, not accidentally, the name of that program is Neighbor to Neighbor, actually. I honestly think that our neighbor is wherever a need presents itself in front of us, wherever that may be, from whomever that may be. And I'm talking about my social work has been primarily focused on low-income families and the poor. But so those are my neighbors, but those aren't all my neighbors, right? We all have literally neighbors. That's one way to think of it. But I do think it's whoever is in front of us with a need that we can address. We can choose to address. We can actually address it. Maybe not fully, but we can reach out to them in a way where they know that we are intentionally engaging with them when we could have as easily not have.
And we have one more question from one of our online viewers. It goes like this. Catholic Charities do a commendable job of serving our communities. How can we, or what should we do to stop poverty and homelessness in our society?
I don't know the answer to that question. It's extremely complicated question, and I think that we have poverty and homeless in the United States that need not be It's a matter of will. It's a matter of will. I think it's in one of the social teachings of the church, and I know Pope Francis has referenced it, about a society should be judged on how we treat those with the least among us. And America's not there yet, obviously. And we can, in the meantime, as we have people working at the macro level to address the politics of it and the resource of it and the structure to change those things. In the meantime, we can address in a micro way those immediate needs of those on a micro level, and bringing sort of the knowledge of the micro to the macro. So we're not just creating institutions, but we're creating a togetherness of those who face the need, know the need, have the need, and solutions. Those need to come together, as well as the will of those in this country to disappear it.
Okay. We have one more question. Yes.
Ken, you mentioned that you did go for a social work degree, I think, after you had a master's already. In what?
Education.
In education. And then where was it you don't have to say the name, but was it a private school, a Catholic school, a public school? What kind of college and what kind of values were they promoting, therefore? Were they consonant with Catholic teaching, for example?
Yeah. Okay, sister, it's a big question. So I actually got my master's in education from Loyola Marymount in LA. And my degree in social work is from Cal State San Bernardino, yeah, a public school. And so those values, those Catholic values that I hold dearly within myself, wherever I receive an education, be it from television, my own reading, talking to people, going to a public school, I filter what I learn through my values and figure out I'm the filter based on the instruction I've received from our church, right? On what my response will be based on that filter that I've been blessed with.
Great question and great answer. Thank you so much. It looks like these are all our questions for today. We really thank you for joining us here live at the studio of WordNet, and thank you for joining us also through our Facebook and YouTube accounts. We thank, again, Ken Sawa with a round of applause for his great presentation and Truth Talk. So, thank you.